All right, let's start with the backdoor cut and thinking about things happening in the NBA as we're in the free agency period, along with some trades. The way I'm going to break it down is I'm going to go to two or three teams which have made individual effects as far as restructuring their team. Then I'll transition to playoff teams that are looking to keep themselves in that vicinity. And then finally, I'll go into some bad teams making some potentially bad deals, but the reasoning, kind of behind them. All right, and then we'll go to the Hawks. We'll wrap up with the local team here in Atlanta to conclude this portion of the show. The first team you have to analyze as far as free agency and trades so far this offseason, obviously the Los Angeles Lakers. Start off last week with the big trade for Russell Westbrook, sending Kyle Kuzma, Caldwell Pope, and others to Washington. You look at them signing restricted free agent Talon Horton Tucker, THT, to a 3-year, $32 million deal. And you also look at them bringing in several veterans such as Wayne Ellington, Kent Bazemore, Dwight Howard, and Carmelo Anthony, all to 1-year deals, pretty much for the minimum for what they can make at this stage of their career. I think what they're trying to do with the Lakers is you look at the roster, the two main guys obviously are LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Both those guys, though, you worry about their health, whether it's through attrition with LeBron James. 2 of the past 3 years, he has suffered injuries that have kept him out significant amount of time. Now, the 1 year he didn't have a major injury was last year with the bubble, and there was a 4 month gap between regular season contests, and they're able to win championship with LeBron James being healthy on the court. That was also last time Anthony Davis was able to be healthy on the court, and then we saw last year him dealing with the Achilles, and then ultimately his legs broke down on him literally in the playoffs in the first round against Phoenix. So you cannot rely on those two guys to give you a full regular season. I think if they're playing 82 games, which is what they're scheduled to go back to the normal schedule and the way they play, you have to assume that both of them are going to miss 20 plus games. That's just how the setup is with those guys. So with the Lakers, what do you want to have happen? They've been playing younger guys in the past 2 years, such as Kuzma and Caruso. Caldwell Pope is a younger guy in comparison to some of the other players that they've had. They've had ups and downs, inconsistencies with those players. Now, when you bring in a Russell Westbrook, obviously multi-time All-Star, we all know about the triple doubles, future Hall of Famer, just a guy that, and I don't like when they in the media says or others, and he's the hardest playing guy in the world, and he's the only one that gives maximum effort every single game. Because I think a lot of guys give maximum effort. They just don't look like it as much as Westbrook does because he's very demonstrative. And that's not taking anything away from Westbrook. He's an all-timer player, as I said, future Hall of Famer that currently playing, and you can't say that about too many guys. But he does bring a lot of energy and a lot of skills to the Lakers. Now, I think his skill set doesn't translate necessarily to what they need, but I think especially for the regular season, he's durable. He's going to give you a lot of effort, and he is going to be able to keep the Lakers in a pretty solid position when Davis and James are going to miss those 15 to 20 games during the regular season. That's just what they're going to do. You bring in Ellington and Bazemore, guys that are solid outside shooters. You do improve your shooting a little bit with those guys. Carmelo Anthony, his 3 point shot has improved. And I think the narrative on Carmelo Anthony being selfish and not being able to play well with others, I think that's been negated a little bit. I think when he went to Houston and he was at Oklahoma City, yeah, he kind of had his moments of that where he still thought he was the man to be on to get all the most shots, score the most points. But the past few years, getting back into the league with Portland, we've seen him be able to play alongside Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and be that third option at times and play that role solidly. You're going to see that him do that pretty well, I think, with the Lakers, especially playing alongside LeBron James. Those guys are very, very close. They've been wanting to play together since high school, literally. And those guys came into the league together. They're very close. I think you're going to find a Carmelo Anthony that's going to be very serviceable in his role. The two things you worry about the Lakers, though, is the lack of outside shooting, even with those moves. Oh, and Dwight Howard, I think that helps them with some players on the with the inside. I mean, Howard is not the player he used to be. Another future Hall of Famer, multiple time Defensive Player of the Year, but he does give them solid presence inside. And another thing you see with the Howard, with Carmelo Anthony, guys who are familiar with LeBron James, familiar with the way he operates. So he's bringing, and we saw him in the beginning getting the first trade, Anthony Davis getting losing Julius Randle, losing Kyle Kuzma. Not I mean, excuse me, the trade with for Anthony Davis, Brandon Ingram, Alonzo Ball, guys that LeBron James wasn't familiar with. Obviously, he had an agent relationship with Anthony Davis, and Davis is a better player than those two guys, without question. But a guy that you know the resume, you know what to expect. I think with guys like Kuzma, even Caldwell Pope, you never knew what you were going to get from them because Shooter, who's not going to be back with the team, one night it might be good, one night it might be bad. You will say you can pencil in pretty solidly what you're going to get from each of these guys as far as their expectations. But I still think their outside shooting is lacking. They're going to try to bully you inside. I said with Westbrook, who drives the ball a lot, with James and Davis, who can shoot the outside shot, but they're effective in the post or more effective in the paint area. You're going to see a lot more driving, a lot. They're going to try to approach it that way, and then maybe someone gets hot every night, whether it's Ellington or Bazemore or a THT. That maybe they'll be hitting their outside shots. But that's the one thing you got to be kind of concerned about. And then the age. The average age of the roster is 32 years old. That's as we're doing the show. More moves can possibly be made, but that's a very old roster. It's going to be one. If this is the roster they come into the season with, will be one of the oldest in NBA history as far as the entire roster overall. So you do worry about them breaking down in that regard, but they are putting themselves. It all comes down to James and Davis. If those guys are healthy and running, and Westbrook too, you got to put them in that category now. If those three guys are healthy and up and running, they're right there as far as favorites in the West with several other teams that we may touch on, I think, throughout the show or throughout this portion of the show. But the Lakers, they obviously are a team that made some major moves. You got to look at the Chicago Bulls and what they've done. They've brought in three free agents to complement Zach LaVine and try to put themselves in a playoff position. DeMar DeRozan, $85 million deal over 3 years. Lonzo Ball, he's worth $85 million as well. His deal is 4 years. And then Caruso moving from the Lakers to the Bulls on a 4 year, $37 million deal. I look at the Eastern Conference and the guaranteed playoff teams, I think, right now, if you look at it, obviously Brooklyn and Milwaukee, those are clearly, I think, the two best teams in the East. Then you transition, you got to look at Philadelphia, Atlanta, and it's not in any particular order. Outside, I think of the Bucks and the Nets as being two of the strong favorites in the East. But as far as postseason teams from 3 to 8, it's going to be a mix between, I think, Philadelphia, even with the Ben Simmons drama, they're still a playoff team. Atlanta has made some major moves, and we'll get to Atlanta in a few minutes. Miami, and we'll get to Miami as well. But you got to look at those squads. Indiana, I think, is in the running for a playoff spot. The Knicks, they're a postseason team. The Bulls, I've seen some people, and obviously you can't go by Twitter and watching the sports shows. I make a big mistake. I watch the national sports shows on ESPN and Fox, and you can't believe what some of those guys say because two things. One, the producers are literally telling you, and they always deny it. They'll say, okay, you're going to be for this side, you're going to be for the other side, and that's the quote unquote debate. So this is not necessarily their true opinions, what you hear from these guys, but also you want to, if you say what I just said, that's not going to make headlines. If you say like us, one guy said the Bulls are a favorite in the East or contend for the Eastern Conference, no, that's not it at all. A sensible mind would say that they're a playoff team, maybe getting that 6 to 8 spot. That doesn't make headlines. Making headlines saying the Bulls are going to contend for the Eastern Conference Championship. No, not even close. But they can be a playoff team with that roster. And as you mentioned, Levine, he was putting himself in line for not MVP necessarily, but an All NBA type player until he got COVID and things really went south, for the Bulls. But with these additions, Ball, I think, is a solid player. Caruso, that's a little high, I think, for his salary. I think his contributions are very overvalued. You see what he did with the Lakers in not mop up duty, but off the bench in a reserve role. With that money, you're expecting him to start and be a major player. I mean, granted, he's probably going to be a bench guy because I think Lonzo and Levine are going to be your backcourt. But Caruso is going to be expected to get a lot of run in that lineup. And I don't know with the additional minutes if he's going to get exposed. And then DeRozan, 3 years, 85 million. Good for DeRozan. That's a nice contract. He probably could have gone. He definitely took the money in that scenario. And I never get on players for taking the money in this scenario. But he could have gone to one of the Los Angeles teams where he's from, gotten less, but be in a more competitive situation. Or Miami was maybe in the running, but none of them were going to offer that amount of money for a solid mid-range player who can give you maybe 18 to 20 a game, and that is maybe being generous, with that. I think it's one of those situations where he took the money. He'll be a veteran on that squad, which is a good thing, and he still can contribute. But I think if you look at all those moves, that doesn't put him in the championship picture, in my opinion. But they were active. Miami was very active as well, bringing back Jimmy Butler to a massive deal. Kyle Lowry, he joins them now in Miami. Duncan Robinson, they brought him back 5 years, $90 million to stay with the team. I'd still think that with all those moves, it's a lateral move for them. I still put them in that maybe 4 to 6 to 7 as far as in the Eastern Conference. Maybe they can get up to 3, but I don't think that makes them necessarily a championship team. Now, it makes them a playoff team, and that's a good thing. And I think you got to look at the possibility of several players, and Miami will be in this because they go big game hunting. What's the situation with Damian Lillard in Portland? What's going on with Ben Simmons in Philadelphia? The Zion Williamson deal in New Orleans, that's going to be very testy as well. They're putting themselves in a position that maybe they can go for one of those guys as well. But they are banking on Duncan Robinson to continue to be a borderline elite 3-point shooter. That's a lot of money for a one-way player. I think defensively he lacks a lot of ability there as well. But I guess you figure with Jimmy Butler and with the Duncan Robinson and with some of their other players with Bam as well, Bam Adebayo being the low post player. Lowry is a veteran point guard. He's not going to mess it up too much for you. Maybe they think they're a playoff team and brought in PJ Tucker as well from Milwaukee, so you get some veteran attributes there. I still think though that they're a team that's third or fourth best in the East at its peak. But still, I think that was a team that was very active, with their decisions. I look at some of the playoff teams around the league trying to keep their position. Andre Drummond 1 year deal with the Sixers. That's just to be a nice backup to Joel Embiid. So, and I heard from somebody as well. They can play on the court at the same time because Drummond obviously is a very much a low post player. Embiid likes to be out in the perimeter, shoot at 3 pointers a lot, things like that. I don't know how that's going to necessarily work with just the makeup of the team. We got to see what happens with Ben Simmons. The more the offseason goes along, the more it looks like they're going to keep him. But we've gone over this before. Until Ben Simmons improves his outside shooting and his free throw shooting, that's going to be a liability playing alongside Joel Embiid. But as that, I think Drummond 1 year deal with the Sixers, that's not a bad move at all. I think that it's disappointing for Drummond because I think he was looking to, after being with the Lakers last year, to cash out and get a big time deal. The market wasn't there for him. So 1 year deal with the Sixers, I guess he's gonna try to play well in Philly and maybe get back on the market next year. Mike Conley, 3-year deal, $72.5 million to stay with the Utah Jazz. I don't like aging point guards that are starting to develop injuries, and we saw Conley last year be ineffective in the playoffs for Utah. And you re-sign him to a 3-year deal worth that much money. I don't know if they, and I know that he does provide stability at the point guard spot, and you get Donovan Mitchell playing at the wing or not handling the ball as much. I think Mitchell's he could be a solid point guard, but he's more effective and I know it's positionless basketball, so bring up every guy brings up the court, ball up the court at some point during a game, except really for your center, most likely. But I think that it's one of those deals where Utah had the best record best record in the West last year, with Conley playing the majority of the regular season, and even with Donovan Mitchell, him having his injury issues, Mitchell came back for the playoffs and played pretty solidly. But I guess they figured we're going to run it back and try to do this again. And I still think that Utah finds itself, and I mean, if they finish first in the West again, that's obviously very good. But I think that's once again another lateral move for a guy who's developing injuries at the point guard spot. This year, that deal might not look so bad, but years 2 and 3, that's gonna be very tough. I did not like that move for Utah. Evan Fournier signing a 4-year deal with the New York Knicks for a large amount of money. Remember, the Celtics acquired Fournier from Orlando last year at the trade deadline, and he had some solid moments in Boston. But the thing about the Knicks is they're still trying to find that second scorer, that second guy to play alongside Julian Randle. You saw last year in the playoffs against the Hawks when Randle was struggling, or everyone was focusing on him. There was not a second scorer consistently to help him out on the Knicks. It wasn't Derrick Rose, wasn't RJ Barrett. They couldn't find that consistent second guy, and that really hurt the Knicks in that series. I guess I think Fournier is going to be that guy. We'll see about that. I still think the Knicks are a playoff team, and Thibodeau's a solid head coach, but I don't know if Fournier is going to be that second contributor to get the teams out of the first round of the Eastern Conference. Portland signed Norman Powell to a 5-year, $90 million deal. I once again with the Trailblazers, they got to figure out the Damian Lillard situation. Is he with the team consistently, or is he going to be on the team or not? And until you do that, I don't think Norman Powell is going to be the answer for 5 years and $90 million. Solid player once again, but I just have to see what the setup for Portland is going to be this season before you can make a full analysis of that deal. Tim Hardaway Jr. We signed with the Mavericks, 4 years, $74 million. That's a situation where you got to keep Luka happy. Rick Carlisle and Luka had some issues against the former head coach of the Mavs. He's now in Indiana. You bring in Jason Kidd. You want to gotta keep Luka happy. That's their biggest thing. And Hardaway Jr. plays well alongside Luka, and they still got to figure out Porzingis. I think kind of similar to the deal with Dame Lillard in Portland. With Porzingis, we've seen him and Luka kind of clash and have some issues. Are you going to keep Porzingis or not? If you keep him and then you have Hardaway, if you run it back from last year, I think that's a solid playoff team and a team that could maybe get out of the first round. But 4 years, $74 million, that's a little bit rich for Hardaway, but he does work alongside Doncic well, so that's not the worst deal in the world. And then the final deal I want to discuss as far as teams that are going to be in the postseason. Chris Paul, 4-year deal with the Phoenix Suns, could be worth as much as $120 million. You knew that when he had the player option to go back to Phoenix for 1 year and $44 million, or at least 40 plus million, and he turned down that deal. You knew he was looking for more money over more years, and he got that 4 years, $120 million. So his average salary is only 30, but he's going to be signed with the Suns through the age of 40. Look, Paul is a tremendous player. I think a first team performer last year. We saw what he's did with the Suns, helping him get all the way to the NBA Finals, being that nice stability with DeAndre Ayton and a Booker. So he brings a lot to the table in that regard. But that's a lot of, I mentioned with Conley, add that times two or three with Paul. Now, Chris Paul's a better player than Conley and got the Suns further than Conley did with the Jazz, but he's another guy that has had injury issues in the past. He had him in the playoffs. We saw with the shoulder with the stinger, and that caused him issues. You saw him wear down a little bit in the NBA Finals. That was the longest he's ever played in a season. So you add all that together, injury issues, and just age at that point guard spot, that's a concerning contract over in the last year or two of it. I think the first year or 2 years you might be all right, but I would have gone now the money itself, the 30 million per year. That's not the worst thing in the world. That's pretty standard for what he brings to the table. That's just the market. But that third and fourth year, and you had to sign him. But then Phoenix is in a tough spot. You have to sign that guy and bring him back. You can't make it all the way to the finals, have all that positive energy, and then see him go to the Lakers or go to Milwaukee or some other high caliber team. So that was a good marriage and a good together situation. But I just don't like that third and fourth year on the contract. But that's what you have to do. Speaking of teams that have to do some things just because they have a lot of money and you got to have somebody to be the lead guy on your squad, I think these are some bad teams that sign some potentially bad deals. Look, the story of Shea Alexander with the Oklahoma City Thunder, it's a nice story. Solid player, found playing time there, averaged 20 plus points last year, but 5 years, $172 million maximum contract extension. I don't want to say he's not a max player, but that's money that should be reserved for the Trae Youngs who we're going to get to, or the Luka Doncic when he signs. You have to assume he's going to sign that deal in the offseason. Those are max level guys outside the usual suspects of Durant's and LeBron's in that regard. But I look at that deal and Oklahoma City, they're still going to be bad. They're not going to be a playoff team. They're going to be right in contention for the lottery to get a top 2, 3 pick, whether you have them or you don't. And for them just to sign them to that money is, I just don't see the correlation with that. And the problem is, though, no one's really going to go to Oklahoma City. They may have the worst, they may be one of 3 or 4 worst teams in the NBA. You have all that money. You have a bunch of draft picks that you've been acquiring over the past few years. So those are all going to be rookie deals. That money has to go somewhere. And sure enough, Alexander took advantage of it, and now he's got a max deal. But I still think the Thunder aren't going to do anything. Same thing with the Cavaliers signing Jared Allen to a 5-year, $100 million contract. Cavs are in the same boat. They're going to be very, very bad next year, probably for the next 2 years. They're trying to acquire talent. Yes, we know Colin Sexton there and some others. They're trying to build that team, but they are going to be bad. And I Allen's a good player. We saw him with the Nets that he was a solid contributor there. With the Cavs, he's done okay there too. A post player can average a double double for you, and that's nice. But similar to Oklahoma City, no one's gonna go to Cleveland if you want to contend as a player. You'll go there for the money, and Allen's already been there. He knows the system, or he knows the city. He knows what the setup is. So they signed him to that deal, and that's how they're going to roll. But once again, the Cavs are not going to go anywhere this season. They're going to be right there in contention for a top pick, like they were this past year. I just don't know what's going on there. Will Barton signing a 2-year deal, $32 million to stay with the Nuggets. That should have actually been the playoff team because the Nuggets are a solid team and they're not going to be a bad team. But I don't get that move as well. Look, he's a nice player, but and it's 2 years, so it's not the worst deal in the world as far as length goes. I just don't see his value in that regard. And then the Spurs signing Doug McDermott to a 3-year, $42 million deal. Like the Spurs are spinning their wheels right now. This isn't my Spurs. I'm 40. I remember Spurs winning championships, and that's not the team they have right now. DeRozan's gone. Aldridge, he's gone. He was traded. this year and then had to retire, unfortunately, due to health issues. That's a really, really bad team. And look, Popovich is a Hall of Famer, all-time head coach, one of the best to ever do it. But that's a really, really bad team. And McDermott is not going to be an answer for them for the next 3 years. So that's a move they probably could have used that money in some other ways. But a team that did their money well and are on the rise and trying to keep themselves on the positive side of things are the Atlanta Hawks. They re-signed their two young players within the past 48 hours. Trae Young, 4-year deal worth $207 million. Earlier this morning, we got word John Collins, 5-year deal, $125 million. Very good move for both guys. Trae Young is in line to get that extension, and that $207 million. There's some contingencies with that. I think it's around 170. But if he makes some All NBA teams and reaches some other threshold and get up to 207 million. But he's the face of the franchise. We saw the run that he had in the playoffs with the Hawks, getting them all the way to Eastern Conference Finals. He's a marquee name not only within the city, and we live in Atlanta, so I know how valuable he's been in that regard. But you look at what just his play, and he could be a guy you build your franchise around and a guy that can attract other talent. And John Collins has made himself into one of the better forwards in the NBA. Some inconsistencies at times 2 years ago. Obviously, had the suspension for the PEDs, but I think that's been overcome. And we've seen him be a solid contributor for the Hawks. I know you look at 5 years, $125 million for a quote unquote solid player, but and that's $25 million a year, but that's the market for him. And he was going to get it somewhere. If he didn't get it now, he probably would have gotten it somewhere else. And it's not. And furthermore, if it goes south with John Collins, like it's just not working out, it's not the worst deal in the world that you can make some trades on, and or trade him away to somewhere else. But you look at the Hawks and that roster and their build; those were two guys that you really wanted to have as your pillars. You have your post player, and I say post player. He plays a perimeter as well, but your inside guy and your outside guy. That's who you can really work with. Now the Hawks, and a lot of those guys are under contracts. You still have DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, Kevin Herter. Those guys are still under contract that you can do some things with. You have Gallinari on the team, you have Bogey. They have with Clint Capella. They have a really solid squad on that team. And if you want to make a move, and I should have mentioned Bradley Beal with my kind of not disgruntled but questionable guys with their current rosters. If you want to make a move for a Damian Lillard or a move for a Ben Simmons or a Bradley Beal or a Zion Williamson, you now have a group of players under solid contracts, tradable contracts, that you can make those moves. You can package a Kevin Herter and a DeAndre Hunter and Reddish with some other things going on and get a Bradley Beal or get a Damian Lillard. So they have done a really solid job constructing that roster. But obviously, the two pillars that you wanted to keep on the roster as you continue to build on are Trae Young and John Collins. And the Hawks, it's still a lot more offseason in the NBA. You got to put the Bucks, they're defending champs. They have Giannis and just a really good team there. They are probably better than the Hawks. And then you have to put Brooklyn and I know they had some injuries last year, but with the grouping of Durant, Harden, and Irving, that's really tremendous group of talent. Now they don't have much else besides those three, but those three alone are tremendous. There's no reason the Hawks can't be a third or fourth seed in the East, and we saw them make a run last year, and they could be right there next year or this upcoming season. But to do that, you had to keep Young, and Young you had to re-sign him to a deal. He's coming up on his contract, and then John Collins was a restricted free agent. So you want to get those two guys on your docket, and now they're back, and that's a very good situation for the Hawks. And that concludes this portion of the Backdoor Cut.